Hello, everyone, and welcome to, this is the third edition, or third episode of Trainer Talk. Decided that we've done three so far, or we're getting ready to do three. Again, my name is Aaron, he is Korey, and we have a good one for you today. I think it's timely in that at the beginning of the year, and usually, as we get into the spring months and graduating into summer, I guess a lot of people are thinking about nutrition and trying to be as healthy and as fit as possible as we get into those spring months. So we're going to talk about nutrition and specifically some common nutrition myths that people hear about and maybe have even followed at some point. So maybe you're struggling with, making some diet or nutrition decisions and can't figure out, what is fact or what is hype behind some of these. Well, we're going to try to help you through that today and hopefully answer some of those questions. But first of all, welcome back. How are you doing, Korey?
I'm doing pretty good, but your mention of summer is kind of funny because I'm pretty sure that we've started the third winter,
right?
On Iowa, but yeah, so it doesn't really feel like we're getting there very fast. I wish it would come faster, but yeah, I'm excited for this because there's so many. There's
so many, and just real quick, you mentioned like the third winter, I think is what you said, and it's kind of like we're getting ready for like hopefully some outdoor sports. A lot of my athletes are moving into that. I'm gonna do a little more of like actually coaching track this spring, so that should be fun. But it's kind of like everyone's trying to get outside for practices to get ready for their season. It's kind of like we might have one day, and of course I'm in Illinois here, and we might have one day where it might get up to 60, and then we're thinking, all right, cool, we can get outside, we can do some stuff, and then the very next day it's all the way back down to 40. So I envy all of you that are watching right now that are in those more warmer climate states right now and maybe don't have those fluctuations that we do here. But so anyway, you're saying you were really excited about this one. I know that this is maybe a little more your expertise than mine specifically because of what you've studied and the specific education that you've gone through. So I guess we can go ahead and get started here. And I know one of the first ones that we were hoping to mention was the idea of bad macronutrients. And I can let you go ahead and get started there. I know this was a big one for you.
Yeah. Well, it's so prevalent, and so this is so I guess our first myth would be that there are inherently bad macronutrients, and so everyone knows what we're talking about when we say macronutrients. We're talking about protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and food sources of those things, and over the years, when I guess you and I were maybe going through school, or maybe a little before that, like maybe our parents, the D nutrient was dietary fat. Yeah. And so that the goal in pretty much every nutrition recommendation was push it as low as possible. Push it as low as possible. It's bad for you. Well, then we kind of found out that like there are different types of fats, and that some types of fat that might confer health benefits. So we learned the type of fat that might be in things like extra virgin olive oil or avocados. So that would be moderated fat. So, and then we found out there's this type of fat that might be in fish and other plant foods. That's omega-3s. So, okay, hold the on that, maybe fat. But now recently, like in the past couple decades, it's carbohydrates. And so that started with Atkins, obviously, with the theory that carbohydrates was particularly fattening over other macronutrients. And then, the paleo diet for a while was low carb-ish. That's somewhat, and then obviously the more recent ketogenic diet popularity has kind of been anti-carbohydrate. And I guess what has, if we look at things this is typically from weight management standpoint, weight loss, weight management, the avoidance of weight gain. What's been pretty consistently showed is that if calories are controlled adequately, like if you are meeting your adequate calorie needs, not going way over your caloric needs for the day or for a point in time, it doesn't matter all that much. The percentage of your diet, whether it's carbs or fat, those are really almost always the two that are really looked at, that are demonized, that are targeted, and it just really hasn't held up. So I guess would be my first one, as far as like, there doesn't seem to be an inherent bad macronutrient. What might be true about this, because there's always nuance when it comes to nutrition, right? Like, it's not the end all be all. It's not always going to be black and white, but would it be good to get all your carbohydrate intake from added sugars or things like simple sugars?
Right. Probably
not. Conversely, great to get all of your fat from saturated fat or trans fat. No, it wouldn't. So obviously there's some level of like balance here, but as long as you're within, a reasonable range of balance, there doesn't seem to be a particularly bad macronutrient that's either going to ruin your health, cause you to gain weight, ruin your performance, or anything like that. And then, like, I guess another thing I'll add to this is the situation also plays a big role in the type of macronutrient that you might focus on. So if we're talking performance, we know that fast digesting carbohydrates that tend to be sugars or food sources of sugars are critical when it comes to enhancing endurance, when it comes to nutrient timing around competitions or training. And I used to be a wrestling strength coach. So and fighters or wrestlers, grapplers are trying to manipulate their body weight close to matches. They want to focus on low fiber, more refined processed carbohydrates, because if they focus on high fiber carbohydrates, that actually adds bulk to their intestinal weight. So that might cause them to weigh a little heavier on the scale. So like the situation in the also plays a big role here. So I know it's a lot. There's a lot to that myth. I guess I'll stop there and get your experience.
Just what you mentioned right there with the wrestlers. I mean, that's where you can get into so many different nuances of like what's good, what's bad. Why are you doing this? Like, why are you trying to, or what your intent is on going in this specific direction, in either limiting carbs or limiting fats, or what you're doing. Now, in reference to more of like the low carb diet, everything that I found is that low carb diets can work to a degree. But it isn't because carbs are bad for you necessarily. Again, assuming that you're not eating like processed, you're not eating candy and sugar all day. But what I found, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit too, is that the reason that low carb diets work is because typically you are increasing your protein intake. And when you do that, you're going to stay more satiated and not crave as many other foods. So if you're more satiated because of that protein or that higher protein intake, you're most likely going to eat less. So then in that respect, you're still getting in your calories because hopefully you're getting in your calories, but because you're not as hungry or craving certain foods, then that is why those low carb diets will work, not necessarily because carbs are bad for you.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely a factor. So like what tends to happen is anytime a certain macronutrient is removed, there will be inherent, maybe triggers that are removed. So let's say somebody does consume a very high processed carbohydrate diet. So things that are very palatable, like they're super easy to eat. They don't very much. They don't offer much nutritional value. And before you know it, you can consume a lot of it and you way over consumed calories on the day. Now you go to a low carb diet. What does that naturally remove? That's naturally removed something that you tend to overeat. And the same can be said for dietary fat. If you go on a low fat diet, maybe you are someone who tends to overeat high fat foods. you overeat on your bacons, your processed meats, or that's just a huge part of it. Now you've taken away a major aspect of calories for you. And so all diets, when we're talking, again, this is focused on weight loss here, like all diets come down to getting you to a point where you have adequately controlled calories, meaning that you've met your caloric intake is meeting your output or your activity level or the calories you're burning in a day. And also a lot of diets will naturally increase the consumption of, well, most diets, not all diets. I think my neighbor the other day was talking about like this crazy diet where like day one all you had was like a grapefruit, or like day two was just like a couple bananas. And I'm like, where did you find this? But also it also have the ability to increase nutrient dense foods. So now you've increased protein, like you mentioned. We know that protein increases satiety, so if that's feelings of fullness. Protein can also increase thermic effect of feeding, and we'll talk about that a bit with another myth, which is this short-term increase in calorie expenditure based on the composition of a meal or the energy it takes to digest and absorb the food. There's a little bit there, but then if you increase nutrient-dense foods, those foods tend to be higher in fiber. Fiber also a satiation effect, so it also makes you feel fuller for longer, and then that reduces or can reduce caloric intake. So if you look at like lots of diets, you look at paleo, you look at Mediterranean, you look at low carb, you even look at keto if it's done a certain way, those things kind of hold true. But of course, all of those diets can be done in a poor way too. Someone mentioned way at the beginning, or someone asked about like vegetarian or plant-based diets. The same thing holds. You can do a plant-based diet where you're primarily increasing your consumption of fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds. Those are all nutrient-dense, high fiber foods. Or you could go the other way where you're just consuming processed carbohydrates. So those all can be both can be plant-based ways of eating, but completely different when it comes to nutrient intake and ultimately like the physiological effect.
Definitely. Speaking of, I mentioned low carb diets, and something that you mentioned is that pretty much one of your first comments was talking more about maybe like a low fat diet. And I think that was everything that I've studied, read. I mean, that obviously became more popular maybe in the 80s, and then 80s into the 90s, really. And something interesting that I found was that when that kind of like low-fat diet fad kind of started, I found some interesting statistics that between 1980 and 2000, obesity rates in the United States for men aged 20 to 74 rose about 10% to 30%, and for women from 15% to 35%. So everyone was on these low-fat diets, but the obesity rates were going up. And I think that speaks to one of your points where people were cutting out fats, probably not getting the healthy fats that they needed, and they were replacing those with processed carbs, eating more sugary foods. So really, they weren't getting the result that they thought that they were getting from going on that specific low-fat diet. So I just thought that was really interesting. If we're talking about low-carb diets, you can switch to the other extreme and low-fat diets. Now, the third macronutrient that we haven't talked about a ton is protein. Now, with both of those low-carb, low-fat diets, you're going to increase your protein intake. We talked about that satiety. But you had some other information on specifically myths surrounding higher protein diets.
Right. Yeah. Before I dive into that, I'll make one like point to what you just said about like the replacement of trying to remove fat, replacing it potentially with things, and then we still have this increased weight, which is not stopped. Like it's still happening with the advent of carbohydrate craze. It's still going up, because what's not changed and what potentially has become even more I guess, part of our environment is the ability and hyperpalatability of food. That's never changed. It's only gone up. So like, yes, we have more options for higher protein, lower carbohydrate, higher or lower processed or added sugars, maybe like increases in different types of fat type foods. Yeah. But we also have stuff too. And it's accessible whenever we want. We can pretty much anything when we want it. And anything that's easy to consume, that tastes really, really good. And that's going to be an issue. And that's exactly what the food system is built, or like, you know, that's what food companies want. Like they want you to keep eating. Anyway, that's just kind of something to, I think, consider with that. But specifically with protein's so interesting because I'm sure that you've got, I think most people have probably noticed that there seems to be a protein version of like almost everything these days. So cereal, there's the original cereal, and then there's the high protein version of the cereal. If there's a granola bar, there's the regular granola bar, then there's the high protein. Like what's going on? So part of it is the research that we know that shows that protein has, you know, satiety effects, has effects on thermic effect of feeding. But what also still exists and still is out there is that high protein diets are harmful to your kidneys. It's like the two things are still existing. It's kind of weird. It's like high protein diets are somewhat getting pushed, and yet you still see that from doctors and some other sources that high protein diets will harm your kidneys. And the fifth here is that there's essentially no research to support that that's true. So basis of this concern is that higher protein diets have some downstream effects that may enhance the amount of work our kidneys need to do to filter our blood. And the worry is that the increased work that the kidneys undertake will lead to, kidney damage, kidney failure, and where I guess it had its roots is in patients with or people with kidney disease who need to be on dialysis. So that became extrapolated to, all right, well then we need to be concerned about this to a healthy population. And really recently, Joey Antonio has done a ton of research on really high protein diets. Like we're talking, like multiple 3-4 times the RDA of protein consumed for 6 months, a year. And he's tracking kidney function, liver function, health markers throughout this time. And he's not seen any detriment to kidney function. So as now, as long as someone is healthy, kidneys function is healthy, there does not seem to be any indication that high protein diets will harm kidneys.
So I guess related to that, from your expertise, is there any, and that this might be another myth or surrounding a myth, that if you eat too much protein, you are going to gain weight? Because I have heard that one too. What have you found? What has your experience been with that?
Yeah, that's another really interesting one, because in theory, you overeat anything, it will lead to, because protein is a calorie-containing macronutrient. It's 4 calories per gram, just like carbohydrates. So in theory, if you overeat protein, it should lead to weight gain, just like any other macronutrient. That's what's interesting. Like, so the high protein study that I mentioned, purposefully overfeeding the subjects. So they were consuming calories far beyond their maintenance calories, but the extra calories in a lot of the cases were coming from extra protein. And what's super interesting about the research is that the subjects just gained weight. Really interesting, and I don't think people in the nutrition world are ready to say, like, go as far as saying that you will not gain weight if excess calories are coming from protein, but it does seem to be supported that it doesn't happen as readily as maybe carbohydrates or fat. And without getting too deep into it, the reason is that protein is just not a preferred energy source in our body. Protein does a little bit of everything. Like so many functions of your body, structures of your body, so many processes rely on amino acids, which is, everyone knows is the building blocks of protein, that it is like the last resort when it comes to energy. You've either got to be starving or you've got to be very, very deep into an extremely long exercise bout. Otherwise, you're going to rely on carbohydrates or fat. And that, it just seems to hold true when it comes to the overconsumption. So if I could go back to my wrestlers that I was talking about earlier, wrestlers get hunger in season. So my recommendation to them is like, if you are hungry, reach for some protein. We know that in a weight loss type situation, increasing protein helps you maintain your muscle mass. It'll help you feel fuller. And as far as we can tell, it is much harder to gain weight if you are overeating protein. It doesn't seem to your kidneys. So that's what the research seems to support at this point. And again, if people want to read more, look up studies by Jose Antonio, and he's done a lot of long-term, not just 6 or 8 weeks. He's followed people for a year and tracked their blood markers and their health markers, and has not seen any detrimental effects.
And speaking of overeating, one of the other myths that we had talked about leading up to this was kind of frequency of eating. What's good? Like, are we supposed to only eat 3 meals a day? Is your metabolism going to get a boost if you eat a bunch of small meals throughout the day? And that's a question that I get a lot from a lot of my clients, that they're not sure what to do because they've heard stories from all different angles on what the right thing to do. Usually I have to take each situation by its own case, and kind of say like, hey, you're doing this right here. You need to do the opposite if you want to lose weight. And it's kind of, I think this is a situation where, from my experience, where it's going to vary, it's going to be a little different for everyone. What have you seen in your experience as far as like eating frequency and what works best for people?
Well, yeah. So for like the best question, like that's where the context of the situation becomes really, really critical. So the myth here, as far as meal frequency, that I wanted to highlight is this old adage that eating smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day boosts your metabolism higher than if you just kind of ate your 3 square meals a day. And again, so like earlier we mentioned thermic effect of food, and for people who maybe didn't catch that, thermic effect of food is this increase in the rate that our body burns calories, because it takes calories and energy to digest and absorb and assimilate our food. So that happens basically no matter what you do. So, but we do know that certain macronutrients have a different effect on it. Protein has the highest effect on it. Carbs are second, and fat is the least, with not much effect on thermic effect. So the thought was, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to stoke this multiple times per day. And by doing that, I'm going to therefore increase the amount of calories I burn in a day naturally, which could lead to weight loss. What we know is the magnitude that you get from the thermic effect is related to meal size. Okay. So if someone ate 3 meals a day and someone ate 6 meals a day, but calories are the same between the two, so we're going to have 3 bigger meals and the same amount of calories consumed for 6 smaller meals, they end up being equal. Thermic effect is equal. So then the calorie burden becomes equal. And again, this would also assume that the macronutrient breakdown is the same, that the ratios of the macros are the same. So for the purposes of things like weight loss or appetite regulation, down to individual preference. So and like which one is better, like which one should you go for. It comes down to which style of eating or which way of eating, what effect that has on you. So some people, if they go with the smaller frequent meals, that has an appetite suppressing effect. Other people, it actually just kind of like they just keep going. They just graze that thing. It kind of stokes their hunger. And like the other way is like sometimes if people only eat those 3 square meals a day and they have a longer period of time between meals, that makes them hungrier. Other people get a bigger bolus at one time, makes them feel fuller. So you really have to know which one you are and which way of eating you do best with. I will say, like, and this sort of context becomes really important. Funny about this myth of like the small frequent meals being better for weight loss. When I'm helping people gain weight, or when people need to gain weight, one of the best things they can do is eat frequently. Like, if you're trying to gain weight and you're not eating every 4-ish hours, it's really hard to gain weight. Like, only eating 2 or 3 meals a day, it's probably not going to happen unless what you eat is just completely calorically dense, super fat, super high everything. That can happen, obviously. But if an athlete's trying to gain weight and I look at their eating plan, it's like, well, you didn't eat breakfast. Your first lunch is your first meal is at 2 p.m. and then you eat. That's not going to happen. So it's just kind of interesting to see like the dichotomy. A weight loss kind of tip that we've heard a long time is actually one of the best weight gain strategies for people who are looking to gain.
One of the biggest hurdles that I've had to overcome in my career as a trainer, I think, is that not so much at the high school level. I've seen this more at the collegiate level, which you would think if you've made it to college and you're really good at your sport, then you're going to do everything possible to take care of your body, eat the right way and everything. But I have found in certain populations for college athletes, they want to keep their weight down. I think it's more of a social image type situation, and they don't understand why they're not performing at their best ability, or maybe the way that they were in high school. It's because they completely changed their eating habits, and almost to the point where, again, that social image concept, they don't want to eat at all, and it's a struggle to try to get people to change those habits and say, no, like, you actually need to eat more throughout the day. And other cases where, and I think this goes to a little bit of what you're speaking to, when people go for long periods of time, they kind of get into the situation where their body's going to hold on to that fat, and because it goes essentially into survival mode. So then they wonder what's going on, because they're like, well, I'm not eating at all. Why am I not losing weight? And to a degree, I think it's because, again, their body's in survival mode, trying to hold on to that fat, and then end up getting sick and goes down the road into a whole other host of health issues from there. So,
yeah, that could also be related to underfueling. Talking about here, underfueling will lead to decreased performance output. So what might be perceived as, oh, I'm holding on to fat, is just a not good body composition, meaning low amounts of lean body mass or muscle mass specifically, and then higher amounts of fat mass. Because if you are underfueling, well, your training is going to suffer. You can't train like you need to in the weight room. You're not supporting your lean body mass, and that's going to go first. Like that. I mean, so like, I don't know how much the like storage thing, like the survival thing happens. Like, we know there's some metabolic adaptation if someone is on a very low calorie diet or way underneath maintenance calories for a long period of time. There might be some adaptation with energy output. But for like an athlete who is maybe shorter term, it's probably more the body comp thing. So then you almost get like this kind of weird higher body fat, that their body weight isn't very high. Probably need to bump calories so you can actually train and perform, increase body mass, and now you've got a shift in body composition.
Exactly right. So I want to keep moving along because we have a lot that we want to talk about. And another myth, I think, that has come up in my experiences is the idea that I can't afford to eat healthy. Now, I mean, you can look at that a number of ways. I mean, if you go to your grocery store, a lot of times some of the healthier foods are going to be priced, they're going to appear that they're priced a little bit higher compared to those processed foods that are, I guess, probably a little more cheaply made. But I think for longer term benefits, I mean, it is going to be beneficial to, maybe spend a little bit more, or I guess have that perception that you're spending a little bit more so that you can be healthy over time. So I was curious about this when we were talking about this myth, and I went through a little scenario where I did a little bit of research to find out exactly how much different foods might be compared to, I guess, going out to eat as opposed to maybe just buying the food at the store and cooking it on your own. So in my search, I went to U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. I figured that was a pretty good source to find prices for food and whatnot. I found that chicken breasts, on average, for example, are going to be about $4.31 per pound. Now, that's based on the average price in the United States, again, from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. I looked up, what else did I look up? Baked potatoes, green beans, and I'll tell you a little bit. I'll tell you what those cost and what I found. So I went to a popular chain restaurant. This is a dine-in restaurant that I found that sells a half-pound grilled chicken breast for $13.99, and that's the full meal. That includes your choice of two sides, like you probably find in most restaurants you go out to. And for the sake of this scenario, I chose again the baked potato and green beans. Now I went back to a grocery store site and found that a 16-ounce bag of green beans, you can get one for about $1.59, and a sweet potato I found roughly about 89 cents. I'm sure that's going to vary depending on like how large the sweet potato is and whatnot. So adding that all up, I found that you can get spend $4.31 for two half-pound chicken breasts, which is the same serving size that you're going to get at that restaurant. Two baked potatoes total, $1.78. Two or more servings of green beans for $1.59. And you have a meal for two people under $8 each. Compare that to the $13.99 that you're going to spend at that one restaurant for one meal, and the benefit of cooking on your own. You can control a lot more the amount of sodium that's going to be in that, because what you find most often when you go to a restaurant, go out to eat, they're adding tons of sodium. And granted, it's for flavor, but they're adding so much more to that meal that is going to be unhealthy for you in the long term. Now, I'm not saying you can't go out to eat every now and then, but if you do that consistently, that's going to have very negative health effects on you. So I don't know if you had done any research on that or what your experiences were like, and maybe talking to people about how, it's really not too expensive to eat healthy.
The big difference here, the disconnect is
right.
Comparing it to eating out. It's just, when you compare it to buying your food from restaurants, takeout, whatever it may be, it's expensive to go to the grocery store. And even now with like the price of food, it's more expensive now, obviously, but it's still cheaper than eating out. It really is. If you just sit down and think about how much you will spend in a very short amount of time at a restaurant for the same food you would make on your own, like the meal you just described. So yeah, it all goes into are you going to pay for the convenience? That's what you're paying for. So like almost every case, the more convenient, you're going to pay for that. And I even think about, I guess the thing that comes to mind with this thing when it comes to just even like eating habits, spending habits is like, even here in the Midwest, what is a medium or large coffee?
Oh yeah,
it's like over $3. And you know, it's fine, like you said, it's fine to do that every once in a while, but you do that every single day, that adds up. So just like being aware of that, it all goes into how much things cost, which then affects your overall diet.
And I think another angle of this is what I've told my clients before is kind of in a joking way, but I mean, it's also serious. You can either pay for it now or you can pay for it later. That's kind of the way that I've termed it to some people, in the respect of if the healthier foods that you are trying to get, I mean, I think it's more of a mindset, like kind of like you just said, whereas we perceive healthier foods to be more expensive. At the same time, whatever you're spending on the food that you might get at the grocery store, you are going to eat much healthier doing it that way, as opposed to eating processed foods with tons of sugar, tons of additives. That might be fine short term, but think about the long-term effects of that. If you do that for a long duration over time, eventually, unfortunately, chances are you're going to be paying in medications, medical bills later on in life, just because you've had unhealthy habits throughout your, I guess, earlier years. So with that, I thought that one was really interesting. Another kind of myth or trend that we've talked about is the idea of cleanses and detoxes. Again, those are popular, especially this time of the year. Again, everyone's trying to, shed a little extra weight, getting ready for the spring and summer months. Now, the idea of a detox is specifically to get rid of toxins from your body. And from everything that I've studied, your liver does that for you, or should do that for you. A healthy liver is supposed to remove all those toxins from your body. Usually a person that says that they need to detox, they're usually living, I guess, an unhealthy lifestyle to begin with. So when they go to the store, buy that detox or buy that cleanse, usually what happens is they've already got into the mindset of, I want to make changes. I'm going to do this for a quick fix. But what usually happens when you purchase a detox or a cleanse or decide to go on that trend or make those health changes, you are restricting your calories because you've already gotten the mindset that you want to make those changes. I guess a quick story, I told you before that I used to work in like a health and supplement store, and almost like clockwork, every year, first of the year, into the spring, definitely beginning of the summer, people would come in and look for those cleanses and detox. Of course, from my perspective, I try to steer them into, more healthier habits and not spending $100, whatever it is for that, 5-day or 21-day cleanse. But it was always interesting in talking to them and finding out what their reasoning was for wanting to do that cleanse or detox. And they admit at that point that they got into unhealthy habits. They want to make some changes. And they looked at this as kind of like a jump start in being a little healthier. But of course, my role there, kind of talking through it. They asked how to use it, so I kind of read the directions on the bottle or whatever it is. And it's always interesting. In most cases for those, the directions were, drink this, all at once, or drink this, a certain number of times during the week, and like fast or eat these certain foods. Limit your beverages to only water. And I started thinking about that, and for some of them, like, it finally clicked, and they started realizing, like, hey, if I'm the only difference in going through this cleanse or detox and just like getting on a full path of making good health decisions is taking that detox, because at that point you are getting rid of all the sugary drinks that you're consuming, whether that's soda or whatever else you might drink. You're making those healthier food or nutrition decisions where you're cutting out all those extra calories that you might not have needed before. You're getting back to the basics. You're like we talked about at the beginning, you're getting back to your core macronutrients and figuring out what's best for you in that sense. So I've always thought it's interesting that in all of my experiences, the cleanses or detoxes might have given a placebo effect. So people are taking them thinking that they're doing a great job and they're losing all this weight, but it's really the other habits that go along with that that are really making the changes.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to all the reasons we mentioned earlier about why certain like diets might work. It all comes back to you're decreasing calories, you might naturally overeat all the time, you might be increasing your nutrient density of your diet, and all those things help you feel better. And yeah, detoxes, it's just, I think, yeah, people want to jumpstart, they don't understand why they're seeing the results they might be seeing. We know in almost every single case it's so restrictive.
And that's even true. Again, we talked about at the beginning about the low carb diets, low fat diets. To a degree, I mean, you're going to see immediate changes because you're drastically changing what you're doing. But like you just said, I mean, those for the most part aren't going to be sustainable unless you have a certain health condition where your doctor is directing you to specifically do that. If you find out you're diabetic, maybe you do need to make some of those changes, and then in that process, maybe you are eating fewer carbs. I don't know. I think that could probably go back to eating the right carbs for you as opposed to just cutting out carbs. But yeah, I think in kind of summing all this up, it's about making healthier decisions, making positive changes for you, for what's going to work for you, not buying into those short-term fixes, really, and kind of dispelling all these myths here. So I don't know if you have anything else on that. I know some people were asking for some references, some specific ideas. Some of the top books that come to mind for me are going to be Diet Lies and Weight Loss Truths. I think that's a really good one by Melody Schoenfeld. We've talked about Nancy Clark's Sport Nutrition Guidebook, which I think is an excellent resource. If anyone hasn't got that, go ahead and check that out. And then a newer one that I'm kind of diving into right now is the NSCA's Guide to Exercise and Sport Nutrition. So, I'm a little biased. I'm certified through the NSCA, but pretty much anything they put out is quality information there too. So,
yeah, also, I think it's our most recent one as well.
Right.
And then we also have Power Eating would be another great one.
So I hope everyone got a lot from this. Like we said, there are plenty of resources that you can go to kind of dig in a little bit deeper. I feel like we gave a ton of information in a relatively short amount of time. We probably could have spent all day talking about these. But we thank everyone for tuning in. We hope we answered a lot of your questions. And until next time, stay on track with your nutrition goals and have a good work.